In the world of nutrition, it's good to be sensitive. It's good to be insulin sensitive. It's good to be able to not take much of a nutrient to elicit a positive response. And just to paint a quick picture, insulin sensitivity is where your body is so sensitive to insulin, you don't need much of it to do a job. And when we look at the big picture of things, we realize that high levels of insulin are ultimately what are contributing to weighing and obesity. Now, there was an interesting study that was just published. Insulin resistance does indeed precede weight gain. Whereas before, there's a lot of controversy of which came first, obesity or insulin resistance. And one of the things that I want to kind of paint a picture for you is when you're doing a ketogenic diet, it's not always the best way to get insulin sensitive. There's a reason why I periodically cycle on and off of keto. Very important things to keep in mind. We have to allow ourselves to maintain insulin sensitivity. Let me explain how that works. So you might be thinking that I've lost my mind when I talk about the ketogenic diet not being optimal for insulin sensitivity. Look at any time that we reduce our carbohydrates. Absolutely. We do improve how sensitive we are to insulin, and that's a good thing. But as you get down the ketogenic line, more and more, you have to think about what's happening. The fuel that is being used by the body is going to be fats and ketones predominantly, which means that those fuels get into the cell independent of insulin. What does that mean? It means that our cells aren't requiring as much insulin. They're just not, if any, at some points, because we're consuming so much fat, and that is our primary fuel, and ketones become our primary fuel. Well, those suckers get into the mitochondria without insulin ever being needed. So what happens? Well, to some degree, we become a little bit glucose intolerant, meaning the body kind of forgets how to process carbs in such a way. But because we're not secreting insulin, our body sort of forgets. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to become diabetic or that you're going to become super insulin resistant, but it can actually decrease your insulin sensitivity over time. So what happens is when one person starts a ketogenic diet for the first couple of months, they get very insulin sensitive because their body is still adjusting. Used to having high level of insulin or moderately high levels of insulin all the time. And then all of a sudden, it drops, and the body's like, wow, this is cool. But it still remembers how to release insulin. It still remembers that process because it's so new. It hasn't been long. But then you've been doing keto for a while, and all of a sudden, your body's like, hey, this is cool. I don't really need insulin as much. This is great. Like, whatever. Okay, go ahead and start laying people off from the insulin factory. You lay off those beta cells, whatever. And then all of a sudden, you have carbohydrates, and your body doesn't really know how to deal with it. So blood sugar goes high and blah, blah, blah. That sounds like a terrible thing. And let me just be very clear that that goes away after a couple of days. Right? It's a fogginess that explains a lot of times what happens if people have been doing keto for a long time, and then they have some carbohydrates, and they're like, oh, my gosh, my body doesn't deal with carbs anymore. I never can go back there. If you actually just gave it a couple of days, your body would probably adapt again, and you'd just be very insulin sensitive. But this is exactly why it's important once you've been doing keto for a while to occasionally cycle off. And it's just because it allows you to actually maintain the benefits. You actually want to realize the benefits of the ketogenic diet occasionally, right? Otherwise, you're just living in keto land to live in keto land. But if we actually want to get benefits like insulin sensitivity, we actually need to test the waters every now and then. Right? Think of it like this. What's the point in owning a race car and driving on the racetrack constantly? But you're never gonna race. You never actually put it to the test. You're just racing just by yourself, but you're never putting it to the test. It's like, a lot of what we do for the ketogenic diet is we condition ourselves to be more efficient. In a lot of ways. We condition ourselves to be more sensitive to carbohydrates, but then we never give ourselves a chance to actually thrive on them. So it's like, come race day or come carb day. Like, we're not doing anything with it. So a point in saying this is my cyclical ketogenic approach is to actually have a little bit of carbohydrates, like in a periodic time, like, take 2 weeks every 3 months or so, and just go off of keto and indoctrinate carbs into the mix. And as you get more experience, play around with having small amounts of carbohydrates after your workout. To play around with having carbohydrates before your workout, just play around with it. Have small amounts. You don't need to go off the keto train. You just implement carbohydrates when you can so that you can experience which one your body feels good with. Because this is not about being dogmatic. It's about optimizing your body as much as you possibly can.